So, hello to everyone. I will give short introductory ideas, which I got recently. I spoke about this topic with my colleagues, Professor Gebhard Zelters and Sebastian Fink and also Andreas Johan. Of course, all things are very hypothetical, but let's start. So I will quote here Gösta Gabriel, who wrote several articles last year, 2 years ago, a nice monograph about the Sumerian King List, and also about the King List. He's a specialist, and as Gösta Gabriel also pointed out, also the Archaic lists are at the utmost importance as they mark the beginning of this 3,000-year lexical tradition in ancient Mesopotamia. Their function is largely unresolved. I will not speak about the earliest lists. I will speak about only the king list, only one king list, and also Tummal inscription and curse of Akkadian. I will explain why. The first king list, which we know were composed in Mesopotamia, probably in the late third millennium and early second millennium BC, which were common practice in the Sumer and Akkad. Then later we have a king list from Assyria, Babylonia, and so on. Probably the most well-known king list is the Sumerian King List, called the SKL. You can see here the picture from Ashmolean Museum. Of course, if you speak about the king list, I will try to compare with another short Sumerian literary text, Tummal inscriptions, which I was always very interested in, once translated in Estonia. This short Sumerian literary text also mentioned Sumerian kings, some of them, some older dynasty kings, like let's say Gilgamesh. Of course, we can dispute was he historical person or not. Then later kings from Ur-3, and even the first king of first dynasty of ICAEM, Ishbiera, active in the Tummal. Tummal, which is one of the main shrines of the lineage, the spouse of the area. It's very important. Of course, this text is very short, 33 lines. If you compare with Sumerian King List, which is several hundred lines. But what is interestingly, if you compare, for example, Akkadian kings and kings of Lagash were not mentioned in the Sumerian King List. None of them in the Tummal inscriptions. So the case of the Lagash kings, of course, not very interesting for me. I will explain why. And the temple of Tummal, as I already mentioned, was dedicated to the goddess Enlil, who was a spouse of the god Enlil, this main god of Sumer and Akkad, protector of kingship. So very important, let's say, main god. So, and the Tummal was also located in Nippur, the holy place of the ancient Sumerian Akkadians, and was very significant sanctuary and played a very important role in Sumerian religion and royal ideology, especially in Ur-3 period, but not only, of course. The question is, I think it can be supposed, it's only very hypothetical, that the reason why Akkadian kings were not mentioned in Tummal inscriptions might be that some Akkadian kings, especially in Aramzin, as we all know, became accursed kings and archetypical of these bad kings of sin Unheilherrscher. So this narrative was promoted in the curse of Agadir. I will quote here Peter Esbak. He also written this article in Estonian. I try to translate. So sorry for my poor English if I do mistakes. Because I found this very interesting idea that when Peter already he also wrote about Sumerian King List in English, but not from this perspective. At least I did found. When he mentioned that the Sumerian King List is essentially a chronicle, and aim of the compilers has been to give a complete picture of the full human civilization. Then from the chronology of history of Sumer and Akkad, from the emergence of states to the last kings in the present, and for this time, the scale also seeks to divide world history in the period. Of course, it's, let us speak, it's not a real chronicle and so it's I think it's a good statement which summarizes Sumerian King List. And we speak about Sumerian King List. Then according to some scholars, it was compiled in the late 3rd millennium BC, OC period, or at the beginning of the Eastern Large period. That Peter also showed that it was written in history. As also Michalovsky published 2003 article about one UC manuscript of SKL. However, most of these copies are from old Babylonian time, especially Eastern Large period. So, nevertheless, SKL is also an important ideological text, which begins with a very long mythological so-called introduction about the primordial rulers who ruled for hundreds or 1,000 years. It was not really historical persons, then they follow so-called historical persons whose reigns were more or less realistic and from only a few years or to several decades. And if we look on the second part of SKL, which had at least historical or so-called historical rulers, we started at the first dynasty of the Kish. Here I inserted the Gösta Gabriel when he wrote about when the kingship had descended from the heaven. Kish was the king, so that it's starting starting point of Sumerian King List. And as Gösta Gabriel also very correctly pointed out, that this the instrument of cities power are the kings who are mentioned on after other with their respective years of the rules. Eventually, the royal city becomes defeated and kingship is brought to a new city, which consequently turns into the new royal resistance. Basically, the city was really a system. The kingship cannot be parallel in the same city. So there can be kingship in the Lagash, Uruk, or Kish parallel. It was like from one to other to and so on. It's very interesting thing which we can see in SKL. So here is I take from SKL translation, which is available online, but also Michalovsky. So I'm interested in Akkadian, especially Sargonic kings. We know the Sargonic kings. Samuel was the founder of Akkadian Empire, 24th century, approximately before Christ. Sharkin, who mentioned he's as the king of the universe, the king of the world, Sharkishati, and he's one of his successors. Who after him, there was Manish Shurim, and then Naram-Sin became a king of the four corners, Sharkibrat al-Abrahim. He was deified, and he became later in Sumerian priest, probably priest or scribal tradition, as something negative. Here is how the SKL present the kings of Akkadian. Of course, there are different traditions. Sometimes there are years, different years, but nevertheless, in quite neutral way. Nothing negative, not praising of them, like another kings of SKL. Okay. Only the kings which were not mentioned in SKL were kings of Lagash. So the first, second and the first dynasty of Lagash. But of course, for this, there are some explanations too. We come back to them. So we speak about old royal inscriptions. I will also mention it here as a parallel. Here is depicted a Naram-Sin, who is the famous victory cell Naram-Sin with horned crown, deified, so fighting against enemies, very muscular men, as a macho. As Douglas Frayne also correctly pointed out, as a part of reconstruction in the Kur temple. So the Kur temple was one of the main or most important temples in Sumer and Akkad, because it was temple of the main god of Elin. Naram-Sin laid out extensive cultural terrace around the Ziggurat tower. Many of the bricks from the platform bear a three-line building inscription of the kings. So in this description, Naram-Sin built of the temple of the god and of the builder of Elin. So he was building in the Ekur, probably also in maybe also in Tummal. We don't know about Tummal, but he was very active in the as other powerful mighty kings of Kish and other kings of Uruk tried to be Ekur, who controlled Ekur, or who dedicated to aerial statues or doing buildings works there. It's very important because it's Enlil was main pattern of kingship and main god of Mesopotamia. What's interestingly also Sharkal-Shari, son or grandson the next king who ruled after Naram-Sin was very active in Ekur. At least we have his inscriptions where he was mentioned as the beloved son of the god Enlil. So he pretended even on the role of the Ninurta, and he was also probably deified, and he probably abandoned from deification. He was mentioned here as a beloved son Enlil, and also he mentioned here as builder of Ekur. So builder of Ekur, so as is Badim Ekur, so Ekur, which is temple of the god Enlil, so Etu Dingem Enlil in Nibruki, so in Nibru, Nippur, so in Nibru, so in Nippur. So Tummal inscriptions. What is very interesting, the Tummal inscriptions or PI is very short literal text written in Sumerian. Consists only of 33 lines. Seems this text has been compiled in much the same way as later Babylonian Assyrian chronicles, at least in Glasner and Grayson and other I compared. Was published by several scholars. One edition was done by Soberger. Those TI, like SKL, can be considered as forerunner of historical chronicles of Mesopotamia, and which is very important. Very important is rituals and religious celebration took place in the Nippur, which were directly related to Neo-Sumerian kingdom. Its legitimacy, its ideology. It's very, very important. Especially Schulgier, line 59 mentions the god Enlil in Tummal, and so role of Tummal and Ekur together, it was really very significant and very, very, very important. Here I will show this text in Sumerian, only 33 lines. It's very, very quite simple. It's also like a list, or more or less comparable with Sumerian King List, starting with Enlil who mentioned as a Lugal, so as a king. Then is what he done. What the build. Then was mentioned his son Aga. Then the Tummal was already fairly ruined. Then was Enlil mentioned. So this translation. So it's beginning in the city of Nippur, and the king, so ruler of Kish, built Enlil's temple, and Aga, his son, made a Tummal splendid and introduced Enlil there. So for the first time, the Enlil fell into ruin. Then Meshanepada, king of the Ur, built the Ur-Shusha of Enlil's temple, and so on. Here is also mentioned Ur's kings, later kings, not early dynastical kings, but also Urnammu, for example, or Nama, founder of Ur3. There also mentioned Amarsin, Amarsuena, and then Eshbiera, of the founder of the Easy dynasty. So the end of Ur3 or scholars. So, but no Akkadian kings, no large kings. The curse of Hagar. It's a relatively long text, as also Sumerian King List. It's interesting, nice literally working in Sumerian, probably written with some propagandistic, we don't know, names. It was probably composed during the Ur3 period or later, and this is probably the earliest literary work which was dedicated to the Naram-Sin, in which he was portrayed extremely negative person. So according to his legend, Naram-Sin had led to catastrophe of the Akkadian Empire with his misdeeds and arrogance, and the Akkadian Empire was destroyed by Gutians, basically gods. Many gods, or most important Sumerian Akkadian gods, punished him. So Enlil, Inanna, Ishtar, Enki, and those punishment of gods for this his misdeeds. See, you can see the Naram-Sin again, and 3 manuscripts from the Nippur. So at least we can date it to 3, and was sorry. Discourse of Paladin, and I also you can see the curse of Akkadian. So manuscripts at least from the 3. But the question is, when was the curse of Akkadian really created? Of course, we can speculate about that also. How we can speculate also about the Tummal inscription and the Sumerian King List. It seems more or less at the same time. End of 3rd millennium or 1st millennium, it was composed probably the end of the reign of 3 or the beginning of the Eastern Larsa, or it was created before 3, as on oral tradition, for example. There are many suggestions and theories. Gerald Cooper, for example, in his monograph about Curse of Akkad, wrote the terminus post quem is the region Naram-Sin. After the king ceased to reign in season, 3 manuscripts of Ur3 period provide the terminus ante quem, circa 2000 BC. Lambert dates Gösta Gabriel text before the beginning of Urs dynasty, and many interpretations of interpretation of Brand, Van Dyck, and later also this interpretation too, which I will not mention here. But my question is, if we speak about these three texts, of course, Gösta Gabriel is speaking about Naram-Sin as very negative person, arrogant person, who made some destruction and bad things in Nippur, in Ekor, and he was punished. We speak the Lagash kings as like a Buddha and other, which were also mentioned on Tummal inscription, Sumerian King List, and there's the explanation that probably the reason was that Buddha, when Akkadian Empire was destroyed and Gutian destroyed, Buddha was collaborator. He did collaboration with Gutians, and this one explanation, for example, Igor Diakonov explained that. But of course, we don't know. There may be some other reasons, because Lagash was also some kind of concurrent to Ur. But nevertheless, come back to Akkadian kings. So Akkadian kings were mentioned in Sumerian King List as a neutral way. So so we can try to conclude. But if we suppose that Sumerian King List probably was created the first, because Akkadian kings are presented and mentioned in neutral way, so no negative connotation. Then Gösta Gabriel already speak about, especially Naram-Sin, Akkadian king Naram-Sin, quite a negative way. Of course, not about Sargon, but about Naram-Sin. And maybe the last was composed of Tummal inscription. In that case, we can try to put three above mentioned texts in possible chronological order. Of course, it's very hypothetical. Maybe Sumerian King List created during Urs III or early Urs III, or maybe not early Urs III, then Gösta Gabriel, when some kind of damnatio memoria of Naram-Sin also took place, probably at the same period or a little bit, maybe generation or two later, maybe. Then creating of Tummal inscription, which probably 2000 or after 2000, because Ishbiera ruled around 2000 and after that. So he's come to power when still last king of Urs III, Ibisuen, was alive, but when Ibisuen lost the power, he was took by Elamites probably to Elam. Around 2003, 2004 BC, and then Ishbiera, who already ruled Isin as independent ruler, was the founder of new dynasty Isin. But there are issues, many issues. Only some of them I will mention here. It seems very logical that Akkadian kings, which are mentioned in SKL in more or less neutral way than in Curse of Haggadah. As I also mentioned, that Naram-Sin was mentioned as negative, as very negative. And in Tummal inscription, there are no Akkadian kings at all. But there are also issues. For example, in SKL, when I mentioned kings of Isin, Ishbiera, founder of dynasty of Isin, and even one of the last of them, like Damir Kilishu, who ruled in 19th and 18th century. In TA, the last mentioned ruler was Ishbiera. How we can explain this issue are the kings of dynasty of Isin added to SKL later. Peter, for example, explained this issue in the following way, and he pointed out that since the SKL ends with the list of the kings of Isin, it inevitably gives the impression that the whole text would have been written during the period of Isin's rule in the Mesopotamia. So, but the question is, of course, we know that kings of Isin trying to legitimize his power, because Ishbiera was usurper, former general of last king of Ur, Ibisuen, and the kings of Isin, they continue ideological ideas, views of Urs III, and try to connect them. And Peter supposed that probably they added the names later there. Also, Gebhard Zeltz, in his article, also when he speaks about Sumerian King List, he also speaks that this the tradition the list right here of wahrscheinlich in the right side. So according to Duktus, it's early Babylonian most of the time, but they have also some Urs III in the fragment copies. And so basically the earliest version of SKL is now known, and it's from Urs III. But the problem, of course, is with the dating of Tummal inscription. Of course, can also date it on late third millennium or early second millennium. And as we see, we can also know exactly when the Gösta Gabriel was created, more or less. Late third millennium probably. But if you look from that perspective, that Sumerian King List kings, Akkadian kings are mentioned, then but Akash kings already not. So it should be then probably already U3. And in Gösta Gabriel, Naram-Sin depicted as very negative, first time in the history. Then later it come to several Akkadian legends, which was composed later. And in Tummal inscription, there were not mentioned at all any Akkadian kings who were very active as a builder in the Nippur. Then I suppose that maybe it is possible to put in that chronological way Sumerian King List as first, Gösta Gabriel, and then Tummal inscription. Thank you for attention.